Mr. Greg Burrow from Dragons Are Comics and Fantasy. Make sure you check them out on Anderson Lane here in Austin, Texas. Of course, the lovely Miss Anastasia Anderson, who's going to help keep us honest because sometimes, Mandela effect, my memory gets mushy. And then the unparalleled Mr. Frank Hui is our special guest host. He's going to join us for another week and talk about the Suicide Squad.
The Suicide Squad.
So we're going to actually start off with just Suicide Squad in the comic books, all the way up to Suicide Squad the movie. And then the new James Gunn-helmed The Suicide Squad.
And we're going to go way back in time before any of us were born.
Yeah, right.
So we're actually going to spoil when we get to the movie review,
Yeah.
so just be prepared for that. That's going to be on Thursday and Friday.
Right.
But leading up to that, we were going to be talking about the comics and all the iterations in the live-action universe, like Smallville and
animated versions,
and stuff like that.
There's actually been, believe it or not, a lot of Suicide Squad in other media and stuff. And so today we're going to go all the way back to the, what?
Well, we're going to kind of go out of order a little bit because in 1964, they did kind of a retcon. They went back in time and did Suicide Squadron, which was in Star Spangled War Stories number 116, September of 1964, where they had Rick Flagg Sr.
Yes, Senior.
Oh.
Yeah. So, this is where it gets into that little tricky fun thing that superhero comics have, is we can go in publication order or we can go in story order. And that one kind of fits in that weird little tangent that's in between.
Yeah.
But the really good one was the first appearance of Suicide Squad in The Brave and the Bold number 25, 1959.
Yeah. Created by Robert Kanigher and artist Ross Andrew.
Now, if you are familiar with the Brave and the Bold comic book, this is the anthology series where they try new things out, very similar to, Spider-Man's Amazing Fantasy, where Spider-Man first appeared and everything. Well, Brave and the Bold, number one, which number did the Justice League first appear in? Before
You
that.
have to say that now.
I
And of course, it's very, very...
Very, very recent. So the Justice League of America first appeared in the Brave and the Bold 2, as well. Not number 2. The Brave and the Bold as well. And the very first appearance of the Justice League was fighting Starro the Conqueror. So that's very
Remember that.
Just remember that. Remember that. So
That's
it's
an
the same
important
thing.
tool we'll use later.
As we all know, the Justice League of America went on to be very popular and have its own books, and they continued with the Brave and the Bold series, which was originally intended, it eventually became a team-up type.
Brave and the Bold number 28.
28? Wow, so they came after them. Nice. They came after them. But the Suicide Squad was another one of their attempts at creating a superhero teams and stuff like this. And this was based on the old ideas of the Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos kind of war stories kind of things. And it has a slightly, in its own weird way, darker secret to it. The original Brave and the Bold had nothing to do with supervillains. It was actually various military and advanced people. They had all had something happen, some kind of trauma. They were literally suicidal. They all had a death wish. They all had the mindset of, I don't care if I die. So they kind of went out. Okay, the best way I can explain this, if you've ever seen the original Stargate movie with Kurt Russell's character, they send him on this mission knowing that if things go bad, he doesn't care if he lives or dies, and he's going to blow everything up. And that's what he does until, of course, by the end he has to change her heart, blah, blah, blah. But he's so sad that, if he comes to dying, he's cool with that. And that's what the original Suicide Squad literally was. They're like, okay, well, if we die, we're cool with that. They lasted for only like a few issues, I think.
It was a 6-issue minute.
6 issue. And so eventually they went on. And so later, after, and if you watch our show, we talk about the Crisis on Infinite Earths all the time. After the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I've mentioned this before as we've done some of our reviews, I think when we went to the theater as well, they had all these new characters, not just from DC Comics, from other companies that they acquired and merged together.
Yes.
Like last week we were talking about our parallel realities merging together. You got all these new superheroes, which is great, but for every superhero, one superhero, you got dozens of villains. And they literally had this like cache of villains that they didn't even know what to do with. And so John Ostrander created the idea of the Suicide Squad. Now, it starts off in a crossover called Legends.
Yes.
Legends we talked about before. I think we actually even talked about it when the CW did the show, because we did the miniseries and did the follow back on it. But basically, Darkseid is invading Earth by tricking them to turning against the superheroes.
Yes.
And this story has come up in a lot of the other Justice League media and stories and everything. And so basically, superheroes are outlawed. And this is where they introduce Amanda Waller, who
The Wall.
who creates this concept of supervillains to fight instead. And she starts off with various ones. They of course have no powers. And when we talk about the first Suicide Squad movie, I'll explain why they completely missed the point there. And send them out on these missions and basically bribes them.
Yeah.
Bribes them, gives them either the option of years off their sentence, or day passes, leave, shore leave kind of thing, or one thing or another. And she's very good and very strategic, and she learns how to manipulate them.
Yes. Bribe and bless, blackmail at worst.
Yes.
Yes.
And because she's someone who is ruthlessly efficient. And it's basically in the same vein like the old 60s movie with Lee Marvin of the Dirty Dozen, where what have you got to lose?
Mm.
And these missions are dangerous, and yes, we're putting you in danger, you're expendable, but if you come out of it alive, you get ahead.
Yeah. So the good carryover, the connective tissue to the original Suicide Squad is where the original Suicide Squad had Rick Flag as their leader. Well, they kind of slightly retconned it as the original one was Rick Flag Sr. The Rick Flag that we all know and love, especially like the one in the movies and everything that I grew up with, of course, is Rick Flag Jr. And he actually really was a good soldier, and he believed in the program and everything like that. And so he was your one grounding force between the villains and everything. And you dead mother, keep them in check, that kind of thing, But yeah.
And he also is a more moral person than Amanda Waller. I mean, all joking aside, someone like Amanda Waller, who is very good at a job, someone like her has to remove her conscience
Yes.
in order to do that job. Sometimes maybe set aside her soul.
Yep.
Yeah.
And because she would probably say, I'm doing what's necessary.
Amanda Waller is very, very progressive and very interesting for a character for her time. She's gone on to be one of the what do you call it, tenants of the DC universe. Like, she's like a constant, and every version has to have her at some point or another.
My
Yes.
favorite.
And she, as we'll go into next episode, there are iterations on television and film of her. And because she is that fascinating of a character.
Mhm.
Because on one level, she is quite reprehensible.
Yes.
And the other, you kind of like, wow, you're fascinated. You're
Yeah.
intrigued.
She's got that whole the greater good mentality, and it's like,
Right. And also, she's a person who has the upper hand on all of these big supervillains and superheroes.
Oh yeah, I think that's my favorite thing about her following in the story, especially
She brings me much joy.
but the comics that I read, well, I liked Firestorm. As I said, John Ostrander was one of the writers of Firestorm, and he took over. When he took over Firestorm, he actually did a crossover called the Janus Directive, and it was basically where they started explaining how Amanda Waller ran too. She was actually also the White Queen of Checkmate. And Janice, of course, is the two-faced being, and it's the whole idea that when it all is said and done, you find out that Amanda Waller is in charge of both of them, and she's playing them against each other to her benefit. She's got bad guys that she controls, and she's got good guys that she controls, and she's basically in control of everything. And she could, and she's an amazingly interesting character. Read some of the old stuff; it's great.
Yes, and she's part of the key to the success of the series, and why even after the show, the original book was canceled, of Suicide Squad, her character lives on. I mean, it's very rare to have a character like that that has such impact,
Mm-hmm.
and
Pretty much every crossover after that, she was involved in
She
some
is in
interview.
that.
Um,
Yeah, because
anything high stakes, especially political.
yes, so
She showed up in a bunch of really cool books and everything, like all the way up
and
through the 90s.
it's the kind of character you can understand why so many actresses would be willing to play her.
Mm.
And we're not just talking about a veteran actress. We're talking about a large range of actresses that have played her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a hard role to turn down, even if you're not the right for the role.
Yeah, even if you're not right for it. Yeah.
Mhm.
And we'll talk about that more when we get to that episode.
Yes.
But yeah, so obviously I think that John Ostrander was really integral in making the Suicide Squad
Yes.
a force until today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which is really funny. You know, I had thought, I had thought that he was the one who brought the Weasel over into the comic books from Firestorm, but it was previous writers and stuff. But still, he brought a lot of the other villains like Killer Frost and stuff over into there. So there were actually a lot of Firestorm villains on the even Firehawk, who is one of the co-heroes
And
of Firestorm. She even served on it for a little
yeah,
while too.
and it's very important interesting how Amanda Waller can rationalize using a character like she used Shade, the Changing Man, because technically, so you're a wanted criminal from your dimension.
Mm-hmm.
We can work with that.
Yes.
Right.
And it's also interesting that the book as general is like, it's not a gimmick.
Yeah.
And it's not, and Ostrander really created interesting characters. He created like interesting relationships with there, so that even though you know this is a book where people can die very easily, you still are drawn to it.
Mm-hmm.
There's still humor, and the humor works.
But I think that's actually really
So-
good. Well, one of the like a current parallel would be the Walking Dead. Is the shock of of that show is the same as shock as the comic book, because you get invested in these characters and any one of them can die and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't see that coming. And I think that's what John Ostrander really did with his run of the Suicide Squad, is he did a little bit of both.
And of
He's
course,
like
James Gunn was very much so,
very much
because
influenced. James
Ostrander's
Gunn's
run
version
was
is
what
different.
he was
Yes.
focused on.
And it was cool because he did both. He did the let's develop some characters and oh, surprise, we're going to kill them right when they're getting good. But then there were some just obvious red shirts, and he's admitted in interviews, he's like, oh yeah, we totally brought that one in to die. But then the thing is, though, is they bring these characters in, they're super lame, and they start having fun with them, and like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden,
Yes.
they're good characters, and the writers become invested in them. And so ones that you expected to die right off the bat managed to live on. And so
Yes.
that was the fun of it, the true not knowing what you were reading.
And
is
these
surprise.
were, and there's a certain intentional dysfunctionality between this team, like you would like a squad. There's going to be dynamics, alpha dynamics, beta dynamics. You have characters who are a little more Weasley, more underhanded,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, yes, they do form a bond in spite of that.
Yeah.
And again, that adds to the layer, and that's why it's adult without being dark.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Brad, weren't you saying last week when we were talking about this episode? Didn't you say there was like some characters that everyone always expected to die, but they always lived? And it was
Oh,
always a
Punch
very-
and Julie were one of the ones
Yeah.
that I really like. And they're based on the Punch and Judy puppet, so there are Harlequins that existed before Harley Quinn, which is why it's such a missed opportunity not having them in the movie. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, that was one of the ones where they kept expecting them to die, and then they didn't. And then when they did, it was like, oh, we finally get some character growth, and it's like it was kind of fun. And especially their dynamic with each other, because like they start off on the same page, but then like he's like trying to manipulate everybody, and he's still greedy, and she's actually starting to think differently, especially when she becomes pregnant. And it's just it's like they're really fascinating characters that I really would like to see in the movie. So yes,
Okay.
those are
All right.
Okay.
well, thank you for joining us today. That's the basic history of the start of the comic books. We're going to start going into the future and when they got revivaled. This is Brad West on the Red Web. We're talking Suicide Squad this week. Make sure you're catching us every day at 3 o'clock. And also go to bradsredweb.com to follow, like, and subscribe on Kaiju Labs Media on YouTube, as well as Facebook, Watch, and Twitch. Thanks again. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Bye-bye.